The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Stillwater Lake lay calm and serene, like a giant mirror reflecting the heavens above. Jack and Emma had woken up early that morning, eager to spend their day fishing on the lake. They had been coming to this spot for years, ever since they bought the little cabin tucked away in the woods. It was their escape from the noise of the city, a place where they could breathe, relax, and forget about the world for a while. Jack sat at one end of the small rowboat, his hat pulled low over his brow to shield his eyes from the sun. He cast his line into the water with practiced ease, humming an old tune under his breath. Emma sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee she'd brought along. She wasn't much of a fisherwoman herself, but she loved watching Jack get lost in the rhythm of it all. The quiet moments between them were often more meaningful than words. "Think we'll catch anything today?" Emma asked, breaking the silence. Her voice carried softly across the water, blending with the gentle lapping of waves against the boat. "Hard to say," Jack replied with a shrug. "But if we don't, I won't complain. Days like this are worth more than a bucket full of fish." Emma smiled, sipping her coffee as she gazed out at the lake. The surface of the water shimmered under the sunlight, broken only by the occasional ripple caused by a jumping fish or passing breeze. Birds chirped cheerfully in the distance, and the scent of pine trees wafted through the air. Everything felt perfect, almost too good to be true. For a while, neither of them spoke. They simply enjoyed the peace, letting the stillness of the lake wash over them. Jack adjusted his rod now and then, hoping for a bite, while Emma leaned back slightly, soaking in the warmth of the sun. It was during one of these quiet pauses that something unusual caught her eye. At first she thought it might be a trick of the light, a shadow flickering across the surface of the water. But as she squinted, trying to make sense of what she was seeing, she realized it was something solid, something floating. "Jack," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the tranquility like a knife. He looked up from his rod, eyebrows raised. "What is it?" She pointed toward the middle of the lake, her hand trembling slightly. "Do you see that over there?" Jack followed her gaze, narrowing his eyes against the glare of the sun. At first, he didn't see anything unusual, just the endless expanse of water stretching out before them. But then slowly he spotted it. A dark shape, barely visible, bobbing gently with the current. It was far enough away that details were hard to make out, but close enough to send a shiver down his spine. "What do you think it is?" Emma whispered, clutching the edge of the boat tightly. "I don't know," Jack admitted, his tone cautious. "But let's find out." With that, he grabbed the oars and began paddling toward the mysterious object. Each stroke brought them closer, and with every second, the tension in the air grew thicker. Whatever it was, it didn't belong here, not in this peaceful, untouched corner of the world. And deep down, both Jack and Emma knew that what they were about to discover would change everything. As Jack paddled the rowboat closer to the mysterious object, the earlier calm of the morning began to fade, replaced by an unsettling tension. The sun still hung low in the sky, but its golden light no longer felt warm or inviting. It seemed colder now, casting long shadows across the water that danced eerily with each ripple. Emma sat frozen in her seat, her coffee cup forgotten in her lap as she stared at the dark shape ahead. Her heart pounded in her chest, though she couldn't quite explain why. Something about the way it floated, lifeless and unnatural, sent a chill crawling up her spine. Could it be driftwood? Jack suggested, his voice unconvincingly casual. He tried to sound reassuring, but even he didn't believe his own words. Driftwood didn't have arms, or legs, or what looked like the unmistakable curve of a human shoulder. "I don't think so," Emma replied quietly, her eyes glued to the object. "It's too specific." Jack didn't respond. Instead, he focused on steering the boat, his hands gripping the oars tighter than usual. As they drew nearer, the details became clearer and more horrifying. What they had initially mistaken for a piece of debris was undeniably human. A man, face down in the water, his body partially submerged. His clothes clung to him, sodden and torn, and his hair fanned out around his head like seaweed caught in a tide. The sight made Emma gasp, her hand flying to cover her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Is he—" Jack hesitated, unsure how to answer. He leaned forward cautiously, extending the fishing net toward the figure. With slow, deliberate movements, he hooked the man under one arm and pulled him closer to the boat. The weight of the body dragged heavily against the net, and when they finally got a good look at him, both Jack and Emma recoiled instinctively. The man's skin was pale, almost translucent, and bloated from being in the water for who knew how long. His lips were blue and his open eyes stared blankly into nothingness clouded over with death. But it wasn't just his appearance that horrified them. It was the sheer wrongness of finding him here, in this peaceful lake where nothing bad was supposed to happen. Emma turned away, her stomach churning. "This can't be real," she muttered, shaking her head. "It has to be some kind of prank. Or maybe someone dumped him here." But Jack wasn't listening. His gaze was fixed on something else. A strange mark etched into the man's forearm. At first glance, it looked like a scar, but upon closer inspection, it was clear these weren't random lines. They formed symbols, jagged and uneven, almost like crude carvings. Some resembled letters from an unfamiliar alphabet, while others looked like distorted drawings of animals. A bird, perhaps, or a snake, coiled in a spiral. "What is that?" Emma asked, leaning forward despite her revulsion. She squinted at the markings, trying to make sense of them. "Do you think it's a tattoo?" "No," Jack said slowly, his brow furrowed. "This isn't ink. It looks carved." The word hung heavy between them, adding another layer of dread to an already suffocating situation. Neither of them spoke for a moment, their minds racing with questions they couldn't answer. Who was this man? How did he end up in the lake? And what did those symbols mean? "We need to call someone," Emma said, finally breaking the silence. "The police, or, I don't know, someone." Jack nodded absently, but his attention remained fixed on the lifeless figure in front of them. There was something deeply unsettling about the scene. Not just the man's presence, but the way he seemed to blend into the environment, as if the lake itself had claimed him. For a fleeting second, Jack wondered if they should leave him there, let the authorities find him later. But then guilt gnawed at him. This was a person after all, or at least he had been once. Leaving him felt wrong. "Let's get him to shore," Jack said firmly, snapping out of his thoughts. "We'll figure out what to do next from there." Emma hesitated, glancing nervously at the body. "Are you sure? What if we disturb something we're not supposed to?" Her words hung in the air, unanswered. Neither of them could shake the feeling that they had stumbled onto something far bigger and far darker than either of them could comprehend. With a heavy sense of unease, Jack and Emma worked together to maneuver the rowboat closer to the shore. The lifeless body in the water seemed to grow heavier with every passing second, as if the lake itself was reluctant to let go of its grim secret. Jack tied a rope around the man's torso, his hands trembling slightly as he secured it. He avoided looking directly at the face, focusing instead on the task at hand. Emma stayed silent, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her eyes darting between the body and the surrounding woods. Once the rope was secured, Jack began pulling the boat toward the edge of the lake. Each stroke of the oars felt like an eternity, the silence broken only by the soft splashes of water and the distant rustle of leaves in the breeze. As they approached the shore, Emma climbed out first, her shoes sinking into the muddy bank. She reached back to steady the boat while Jack tugged the rope, dragging the body onto dry land. The sight of the man lying there, sprawled awkwardly on the ground, sent another wave of nausea through Emma. His bloated form looked even more unnatural, out of the water, his limbs stiff and contorted. The markings on his forearm stood out starkly against his pale skin, almost glowing in the morning light. They were darker than she had initially thought, deep grooves that looked fresh despite the condition of the rest of his body. "We need to call this in," Emma said again, her voice firmer this time but still tinged with fear. She pulled her phone from her pocket, only to find no signal bars staring back at her. "No service," she muttered, frustration creeping into her tone. How is that even possible? We're not that far from the cabin. Jack glanced up at the trees towering above them, their branches forming a dense canopy that blocked much of the sky. Must be interfering with the signal, he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. He knelt beside the body, examining the strange symbols more closely. These aren't random scratches. Someone or something did this deliberately. Emma shivered, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to ward off an invisible chill. What kind of person carved symbols into someone else's arm? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. And why would they dump him here of all places? Jack didn't answer immediately. Instead, he scanned the area, his eyes narrowing as he took in their surroundings. The lake stretched out behind them, calm and deceptively serene, while the dense forest loomed ahead, casting long shadows across the ground. It was beautiful, yes, but also eerily isolated. If they shouted for help, would anyone hear them? We can't stay here, Jack said, finally standing up. Let's head back to the cabin and grab the radio. Maybe we can get through to someone that way. Emma nodded, though her feet felt rooted to the spot. Something about leaving the body behind felt wrong, as if turning their backs on it might invite some unseen danger to follow them. But staying put wasn't an option either. Reluctantly, she turned and followed Jack as he led the way back to the trail. As they walked, neither of them spoke. The weight of what they had discovered pressed down on them, making each step feel heavier than the last. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made them jump, their nerves frayed to the breaking point. When they finally reached the clearing, where their cabin stood, Emma let out a shaky breath of relief. But the moment of calm was short-lived. As Jack opened the door and stepped inside, Emma noticed something odd, a faint smell wafting through the air. It was earthy and metallic, like wet soil mixed with iron. She froze, her pulse quickening. "Do you smell that?" she asked, her voice tight with apprehension. Jack sniffed the air, frowning. "Smells like dirt?" he said uncertainly. But before they could investigate further, a loud thud echoed from somewhere outside. It sounded like something, or someone, had fallen heavily against the side of the cabin. Jack and Emma exchanged a glance, their earlier dread returning full force. "What was that?" Emma whispered, clutching the door frame. "I don't know," Jack replied, grabbing a flashlight from the counter. "But we're about to find out." Jack tightened his grip on the flashlight, its beam cutting through the dim light of the early morning as he stepped cautiously out of the cabin. The air felt heavier now, charged with an unshakable tension that made every sound, a rustling leaf, a distant bird call, feel ominous. Emma followed close behind him, her breaths shallow and rapid, her eyes darting nervously around the woods. She clutched the edge of her sweater tightly, as if it could shield her from whatever might be lurking just beyond their sight. The thud they had heard moments earlier seemed to echo in their minds, louder than any noise should have been in such a quiet place. Jack moved toward the side of the cabin where the sound had come from, his footsteps slow and deliberate. The wooden walls creaked faintly under his weight, but otherwise there was no sign of disturbance. No broken branches, no footprints in the soft dirt, nothing to explain what had caused the noise. Maybe it was just an animal, Emma suggested weakly, though her voice betrayed her lack of conviction. A deer or something. "Maybe," Jack replied, though he didn't sound convinced either. He shone the flashlight along the base of the cabin, searching for clues. That's when he saw it, the muddy imprint of a hand pressed against the wood. It was large, smudged, and slightly distorted, as if whoever or whatever had left it had been moving quickly. Emma gasped when she saw it. "That doesn't belong to an animal," she whispered, her voice trembling. What kind of person would leave a mark like that? Jack didn't answer right away. Instead, he knelt down to examine the print more closely. The mud was still damp, which meant it had been made recently, perhaps even while they were inside. The cabin. His stomach churned at the thought. They weren't alone out here. Before either of them could say anything else, Emma noticed something else, a trail of similar prints leading away from the cabin and into the woods. They were uneven, and erratic, as if the person who made them had been staggering or limping. Some of the prints ended abruptly, only to reappear a few feet away, deeper and more pronounced, as though someone had fallen and struggled to get back up. "We need to follow this," Jack said firmly, standing up. "Whoever it is might still be nearby." Emma hesitated, her fear warring with her sense of responsibility. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" she asked, her voice barely audible. What if it's not safe?" Jack turned to face her, his expression resolute. "It's not safe to stay here either," he pointed out. "If someone's hurt, or worse, we can't just ignore it. Besides, we're already involved. This isn't just about us anymore." Reluctantly, Emma nodded, though her hands remained clenched into fists at her sides. Together, they began following the trail of prints, their flashlights illuminating the path ahead. The forest grew denser the farther they went, the trees closing in around them like silent sentinels. The smell that had lingered in the cabin earlier, earthy and metallic, was stronger now, almost overpowering. It clung to the air, making it hard to breathe. As they walked, the prints became harder to track. Sometimes they disappeared entirely, forcing Jack and Emma to stop and search for the next one. Other times they veered off in unexpected directions, leading them deeper into the woods. Each step felt like a gamble, as if they were walking into a trap set by forces they couldn't see. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached a small clearing. In the center stood an old oak tree, its gnarled roots twisting outward like grasping fingers. At the base of the tree, partially hidden by shadows, lay another figure. This one was alive, or at least it appeared to be. A man sat slumped against the trunk, his head bowed and his body trembling violently. His clothes were torn and stained with mud, and his skin glistened with sweat despite the cool morning air. Jack approached cautiously, shining the flashlight on the man's face. When the light hit him, he flinched, raising an arm to shield his eyes. "Please," he croaked, his voice hoarse and barely audible. "Don't let them find me." Emma froze, her heart pounding in her chest. "Who?" she asked, taking a hesitant step forward. "Who's looking for you?" But before the man could answer, his eyes rolled back into his head, and he collapsed, onto the ground, unconscious. And then, as Jack bent down to check on him, Emma noticed something chilling. The same strange symbols they had seen carved into the dead man's arm were etched into this man's neck, fresh, raw, and bleeding. Jack's hands hovered uncertainly over the unconscious man, his mind racing as he tried to process what he was seeing. The symbols carved into the man's neck were unmistakable, jagged, uneven, and eerily similar to those they had found on the dead body by the lake. But these were fresh, their edges raw and oozing blood that glistened darkly in the flashlight's beam. It wasn't just disturbing, it was horrifying. "Emma," Jack whispered, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to get him back to the cabin." Emma didn't respond immediately. She stood frozen a few feet away, her eyes wide with shock, as she stared at the markings. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions. Who or what could have done this? And why did it feel like they were being dragged deeper into something far beyond their understanding? "Emma," Jack repeated, louder, this time. His tone snapped her out of her daze, and she blinked rapidly, forcing herself to focus. "Right," she said, her voice shaky but determined. "What do we do?" Jack quickly assessed the situation. The man was breathing, though shallowly, and his skin felt clammy to the touch. He couldn't weigh much more than Jack himself, but carrying him through the dense woods would still be a challenge. "Help me lift him," Jack instructed, sliding his arms under the man's shoulders. Emma hesitated for a moment before grabbing his legs, and together they managed to hoist him off the ground. The journey back to the cabin felt endless. Every step was slow and labored, the uneven terrain making it even harder to keep their balance. The forest seemed darker now, the shadows stretching longer as the morning sun struggled to pierce through the thick canopy above. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of their footsteps and the occasional groan from the injured man whenever they stumbled. When they finally reached the cabin, Both Jack and Emma were sweating and out of breath. They laid the man gently on the floor near the fireplace, which Jack quickly lit to ward off the growing chill in the air. The warmth brought some color back to the man's pale face, but he remained unresponsive, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. Emma knelt beside him, her gaze fixed on the grotesque markings marring his neck. "These symbols, they're not random," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I've seen them before." Jack glanced at her sharply. "Where?" She hesitated, chewing on her lower lip as fragments of memory began to surface. "In one of my books," she admitted after a moment. "It was about local legends, stories passed down from the Native American tribes who used to live around here. There's a tale about Stillwater Lake being cursed. They say the spirits of those wronged return to haunt anyone who disturbs the land." Jack frowned, skepticism warring with unease. "You think this is connected?" he asked, gesturing toward the unconscious man. "Some kind of supernatural revenge?" "I don't know," Emma admitted, shaking her head. "But it fits, doesn't it? The lake, the symbols, the bodies, it's all part of the same story." Before Jack could respond, the man stirred, his eyelids fluttering open. His gaze darted wildly around the room, panic etched across his features. When he saw Jack and Emma leaning over him, he let out a strangled cry and tried to scramble backward, only to collapse against the wall. "It's okay," Jack said quickly, holding up his hands in a gesture of reassurance. "We're not going to hurt you. We found you in the woods. Do you remember what happened?" The man stared at them, his breathing ragged and uneven. For a long moment he didn't speak, as if trying to piece together his own fractured memories. Then in a voice barely louder than a whisper, he spoke. "They're coming," he rasped, his eyes wide with terror. "They'll find me. They'll find all of us." "Who's coming?" Emma pressed, leaning closer despite her fear. "Who did this to you?" But the man didn't answer. Instead, his gaze shifted past them, toward the window overlooking the lake. His expression turned blank, almost vacant, as if he were looking at something, or someone, only he could see. Following his line of sight, Jack and Emma turned to look outside. At first, there was nothing, just the calm surface of the lake reflecting the pale morning light, but then without warning the water rippled violently, as if an invisible force had disturbed it from below. A low guttural sound echoed through the air, a sound neither of them could identify, yet it sent chills coursing down their spines. "What the hell is that?" Jack muttered, his voice trembling. Emma didn't answer. She couldn't. Her eyes were glued to the lake, where a shadowy figure now stood at the water's edge, watching them. The shadowy figure at the edge of the lake stood unnervingly still, its silhouette blending with the dim light of the morning. It was tall, unnaturally so, and its shape seemed distorted, almost fluid, as if it were shifting between forms. The longer Jack and Emma stared, the more their unease grew. Was it human, or something else entirely? They couldn't tell, and that uncertainty gnawed at them, making their hearts race. What is that?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. She clutched the edge of her sweater tightly, her knuckles white from the strain. Her eyes darted back to the injured man on the floor, who had gone completely silent again. His gaze fixed blankly ahead as though he too could see the figure but lacked the strength, or will, to react. Jack didn't answer immediately. He stepped closer to the window, squinting into the distance. The figure remained motionless, its presence both menacing and hypnotic. For a moment, he thought it might be a trick of the light or some optical illusion caused by the ripples in the water. But then it moved, or rather shifted, taking one deliberate step forward. The ground beneath it didn't crunch with leaves or twigs. There was no sound at all, as if it weren't touching the earth. "We need to get out of here," Jack said, suddenly, spinning around to face Emma. His tone was firm, leaving no room for argument. "Now." Emma nodded quickly, though fear rooted her feet momentarily to the spot. "What about him?" she asked, gesturing toward the unconscious man. Leaving him behind felt wrong, like abandoning someone to an unimaginable fate, but staying any longer felt equally perilous. He's coming with us, Jack decided, grabbing a blanket from the couch to wrap around the man's trembling body. Help me carry him. Together, they hoisted him up once more, his weight heavier, now with the added fabric. As they moved toward the door, the injured man let out a low moan, his head lolling weakly against Emma's shoulder. Whether it was pain or fear driving him, neither of them could say, but his distress only heightened their own sense of urgency. When they stepped outside, the air felt colder than before, biting at their skin despite the sunlight filtering through the trees. The forest seemed quieter now, eerily so, as if every bird and insect had fallen silent in anticipation of something sinister. Even the wind had stilled, leaving the world feeling suspended, trapped in a single, suffocating moment. As they hurried, down the path leading away from the cabin, Jack glanced over his shoulder. The shadowy figure hadn't followed, not yet, but it was still there, standing at the edge of the lake, watching. Its head tilted slightly, as if curious, and then it raised one arm pointing directly at them. Though they couldn't hear it, they swore they saw its mouth open wide, forming a soundless scream. "Don't look back," Jack urged, tightening his grip on the man they were carrying. "Just keep moving." But Emma couldn't help herself. She stole another glance behind them, her stomach twisting when she realized the figure wasn't alone anymore. Dozens of shapes had begun to emerge from the woods surrounding the lake, their movements slow and deliberate. They were humanoid but grotesque, their limbs elongated and misshapen, their faces obscured by shadows. Whatever they were, they radiated malice, their collective gaze locking onto Jack, Emma, and the injured man, as if marking them as prey. Panic surged through Emma, but she forced herself to focus. She tightened her hold on the man and quickened her pace, her legs burning with effort. "There's more of them," she gasped, her voice trembling. "We can't outrun them." "Yes, we can," Jack shot back, though doubt flickered in his eyes. "Stick to the trail. If we can make it to the main road, we'll have a chance." The trio stumbled forward, their progress slowed by the uneven terrain and the weight of the injured man. Each step felt like a battle against time, the sounds of snapping twigs and rustling leaves growing louder as the figures closed in. Though they never ran, never even broke into a jog. The creatures seemed to gain ground effortlessly, their presence looming ever closer. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the outline of the dirt road came into view. Relief washed over Jack and Emma, but it was short-lived. As they reached the edge of the woods, the injured man convulsed violently in their arms, letting out a guttural cry that echoed through the trees. His eyes flew open, wild and unseeing, and he began thrashing, forcing them to drop him. "What's happening?" Emma cried, kneeling beside him. Tears streamed down her face as she watched his body seize uncontrollably. Then, just as suddenly as it started, he went still. His chest stopped rising. His eyes glazed over. "No," Emma whispered, shaking him gently. "No, please." Jack placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression grim. "We have to go," he said softly. "He's gone." Before Emma could protest, a low rumble rolled through the forest. The dirt road stretched out before them like a lifeline, its uneven surface cutting through the dense forest and offering a sliver of hope. Jack and Emma ran as fast as their legs could carry them, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The trembling beneath their feet had grown stronger now, shaking the ground with an intensity that made it hard to keep their balance. Behind them, the rumbling was accompanied by a chorus of guttural growls and whispers, sounds that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. Emma risked a glance over her shoulder, her heart pounding when she saw the shadowy figures spilling onto the road behind them. They moved unnaturally, their forms flickering like candle flames caught in a draft. Some crawled on all fours while others glided above the ground, their elongated limbs dragging or reaching out as if trying to snatch something unseen. Whatever they weren't human. Not anymore. "We're not going to make it," Emma shouted, her voice breaking under the weight of fear. Tears blurred her vision, but she wiped them away furiously, forcing herself to focus on putting one foot in front of the other. Her lungs burned and every step felt heavier than the last. "Yes, we are," Jack barked back, his tone sharp with determination. He grabbed her hand tighter, pulling her along. "Just don't stop running." But even as he said it, doubt gnawed at him. The creatures were gaining ground, their movements impossibly swift despite their awkward shapes. And worse, the trees lining the road seemed to be closing in, their branches twisting toward each other to form a canopy so thick it blocked out most of the sunlight. Shadows enveloped everything, plunging them into near darkness. Ahead, the road curved sharply, disappearing around a bend. Jack prayed it would lead them somewhere safe, a clearing, a house, anything, but there was no way to know for sure. As they rounded the corner, relief washed over them briefly when they spotted an old pickup truck, parked haphazardly on the side of the road. Its rusted frame looked abandoned, but the keys were still dangling from the ignition. "Get in," Jack yelled, yanking open the driver's side door. Emma scrambled into the passenger seat, slamming the door shut behind her just as the first of the shadowy figures emerged from the woods. It lunged at the truck, its clawed hands scraping against the window with a sound like nails on glass. Emma screamed, instinctively covering her face with her arms. Jack turned the key, praying the engine would start. For a moment, nothing happened. The vehicle groaned and sputtered, refusing to cooperate. Then, with a loud roar, it came to life. Without hesitation, Jack slammed his foot on the accelerator, sending the truck lurching forward. The sudden movement threw the creature off balance, and it tumbled onto the road behind them. "They're still following us," Emma shrieked, twisting in her seat to look out the rear window. Dozens of the figures poured onto the road, their grotesque forms writhing and contorting as they gave chase. Though they couldn't possibly match the speed of the truck, they didn't seem deterred. If anything, they appeared enraged, their guttural cries growing louder and more desperate. Jack gripped the steering wheel tightly, weaving the truck between potholes and rocks as he pushed it faster. The tires skidded occasionally, kicking up clouds of dust that temporarily obscured their pursuers. But no matter how far they drove, the creatures remained visible in the distance, their silhouettes hauntingly clear against the darkening sky. "Where are we going?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. She clutched the edge of her seat, her knuckles white from the strain. "There's nothing out here but woods." "I don't care," Jack replied grimly, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Anywhere is better than staying here." As they sped along, the landscape began to change. The dense forest thinned slightly, revealing glimpses of open fields dotted with wildflowers. Up ahead, a narrow wooden bridge crossed over a shallow stream. Jack hesitated for a split second before speeding across it, the truck bouncing violently as the planks creaked beneath its weight. When they reached the other side, Emma noticed something strange, a faint glow emanating from the trees. At first she thought it might be sunlight filtering through the canopy, but as they drew closer she realized it wasn't natural light. It pulsed softly, casting an eerie greenish hue over the surrounding area. "What is that?" she whispered, pointing toward the glow. "I don't know," Jack admitted, slowing the truck slightly. "But maybe it's our only chance." Before either of them could think twice, the truck lurched forward again, heading straight for the source of the light. As they approached, the glowing grew brighter, illuminating a small clearing surrounded by ancient, gnarled trees. In the center stood a stone altar, weathered and cracked with age. Carved into its surface were symbols eerily similar to the ones they'd seen earlier, symbols that seemed to pulse with the same unnatural light. And standing beside the altar was another figure, taller and more imposing than any they'd encountered before. This one wasn't shadowy, it was solid, its presence commanding and terrifying. Its eyes locked onto theirs, and though neither Jack nor Emma could explain how, they knew instantly this was the source of everything. The curse, the symbols, the creatures. The figure raised its hand and the truck screeched to a halt as if an invisible force had seized control of it. Outside, the horde of shadowy beings stopped moving, forming a circle around the clearing. "You shouldn't have come here," the figure said, its voice echoing like thunder. The figure's voice reverberated through the clearing, deep and resonant, as if it carried the weight of centuries. Jack and Emma sat frozen in the truck, their breath shallow and uneven. The air around them felt heavy, pressing down on their chests, making it hard to move, or even think. The glowing symbols on the stone altar pulsed in rhythm with the figures, words, casting an otherworldly light that danced across its towering form. "You shouldn't have come here," it repeated, its tone neither angry nor kind, just cold, detached, and final. Its eyes glowed faintly, locking onto theirs with an intensity that made escape seem impossible. Even if they wanted to run, there was nowhere to go. The horde of shadowy figures surrounded the clearing, their grotesque shapes writhing silently, cutting off any chance of retreat. Emma gripped the edge of her seat so tightly her fingers ached. What do you want from us?" she managed to choke out, her voice trembling. The figure tilted its head slightly, studying them as though they were insects beneath a magnifying glass. "You trespassed," it said simply. "You disturbed what was meant to remain undisturbed." Jack clenched his jaw, forcing himself to speak despite the fear gripping him. "We didn't mean to. We didn't know about any of this. We just came here to fish, to get away from everything. We didn't ask for any of this." The figure didn't respond immediately. Instead, it turned its gaze toward the stone altar, running one long, pale finger over the carved symbols. They flared brighter at its touch, illuminating the clearing with an almost blinding light. "Ignorance is no shield," it said finally, its voice colder than before. "The lake remembers. The land remembers. And now you will too." Emma's mind raced as she tried to make sense of its cryptic words. "Remember what?" she asked desperately. "What are we supposed to remember?" The figure's lips curled into something resembling a smile, but it wasn't comforting. It was cruel, almost predatory. "The wrongs done to this place," it said. "The lives taken, the promises broken. You carry their echoes now, etched into your very souls." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. He glanced at Emma, who looked equally terrified, her face pale and streaked with tears. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't interested in explanations or apologies. It had already decided their fate. "What happens now?" Jack demanded, his voice shaking but defiant. "Are you going to kill us? Is that it?" The figure regarded him silently for a moment, then shook its head slowly. "Death is not my purpose," it said, "but neither is mercy. You will leave this place, and you will carry the marks of what you've seen. They will remind you, and warn others." Before either of them could respond, the ground beneath the truck began to tremble violently. The symbols on the altar burned brighter, their light searing into Jack and Emma's vision until they had to shield their eyes. A deafening roar filled the air, drowning out all other sounds. When the noise finally subsided, and they dared to look again, the clearing was empty. The figure was gone, along with the horde of shadowy beings. Only the stone altar remained, its glowing symbols fading into darkness. Jack turned the key in the ignition, relieved when the truck roared back to life. Without speaking, he drove them away from the clearing as fast as the old vehicle would allow. Neither of them looked back. When they finally reached the main road hours later, exhaustion and shock had set in. Their hands trembled as they called for help. But when authorities arrived, they found no evidence of the bodies, the markings, or the strange events by the lake. To everyone else, Stillwater Lake appeared calm and untouched, as if nothing had ever happened. But Jack and Emma knew better. In the days that followed, they began noticing faint scars appearing on their skin, jagged lines that resembled the symbols they'd seen carved into the victims. No doctor could explain them. AI